Have you ever wondered, was Yahweh only known to Israel, or could it be that his name, his presence, and his worship reached people long before the nation of Israel even existed? Think about it. Before Moses stood on Mount Sinai, before the tablets of the Ten Commandments were ever etched in stone, even before Jacob became Israel, there were whispers of Yahweh. So who were these ancient people who knew his name? How did they come to worship the God we now associate with Israel? And what does this tell us about God's bigger plan for humanity? A plan that stretches beyond borders, nations, and timelines? This is the mystery of the worship of Yahweh before Israel. And trust me, what you're about to discover might change how you see the Bible forever. So before we dive in, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you, and your questions just might shape a future video. Let's explore this mystery together. All right, let's start at the heart of it all. Who is Yahweh? You might remember the powerful moment in Exodus chapter 3. Moses stands before the burning bush, trembling, unsure, and full of questions. And he asks something so human, "What is your name?" And God answers with a phrase that still sends chills down the spine. "I am who I am." Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. It's deep, eternal, unshakable. Then in the very next verse, God tells Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel. Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you." Exodus chapter 3 verse 15. Now pause right there. Did you catch that? The God of your ancestors. Meaning, this wasn't the first time people had heard of Yahweh. The name Yahweh, rooted in the Hebrew verb basabeh, means more than just a label. It speaks of existence itself, of a God who was, who is, and who will always be. But here's where things get really interesting. This name, Yahweh, didn't originate at the burning bush. In fact, people already knew it before Moses even stepped foot on holy ground. Shocked? You're not alone. Let's go back, way back, and see where this divine name shows up in the most unexpected places. So, if Moses wasn't the first to hear the name Yahweh, who was? Let's rewind the biblical timeline, all the way back to Genesis. Did you know that the name Yahweh is mentioned in Genesis chapter 4 verse 26? That's long before Abraham, before Isaac, before Jacob. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Genesis chapter 4 verse 26, that word Lord in Hebrew, it is YHWH, Yahweh. Wait a minute, this was during the days of Enosh, the grandson of Adam. Think about it. Just a few generations after creation, people were already calling on the name of Yahweh. So here's the big question. How did they know his name? Who taught them to call on Yahweh? Could it be that God was revealing himself even then to those who truly sought him? Let's look at Genesis chapter 12 verse 8. When Abraham arrives in Canaan, there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis chapter 12 verse 8. Again, Yahweh. Abraham wasn't just encountering a new deity, he was calling on a known name, a name already familiar to his family line. So this raises a stunning possibility. Could the worship of Yahweh have been passed down, even through corrupted generations? Could faithful individuals have held on to his name even while the world turned to idols? This opens up a powerful truth. God was never absent. He was always reaching, always calling, and there were always people who responded to that call, even before Israel existed. Let's dig deeper, because there's more. Now let's talk about someone mysterious, someone who shows up out of nowhere in Genesis chapter 14 and then disappears just as quickly. Have you ever heard of Melchizedek? Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Genesis chapter 14 verse 18. Wait, hold up. A priest of God Most High? Before Moses, before the law, before the Levitical priesthood? Yes, Melchizedek was already serving Yahweh. And get this, Abraham recognized it. And Melchizedek blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Genesis chapter 14 verses 19 to 20. That's right, Abraham tithed to this mysterious priest. So here's the big question: where did Melchizedek come from? Who taught him about Yahweh, the Most High God? The Bible doesn't say he was part of Abraham's family. He wasn't from Israel, yet he was clearly a true worshipper of Yahweh. Hebrews 7 adds even more mystery, saying, Melchizedek is without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 3. Some scholars even suggest he may have been a Christ-like figure, a foreshadowing of Jesus himself. But here's what we can know for sure. Melchizedek proves that the worship of Yahweh was alive and active, even outside of Abraham's household. Isn't that amazing? This shows us that God wasn't working only through Israel. He was already planting seeds of truth across the world through priests, kings, and worshippers who knew his name. Let's look at a few more examples, because Melchizedek isn't the only one. Now, here's another surprising figure who knew and honored Yahweh, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Sound familiar? He's the father-in-law of Moses, but he wasn't an Israelite. He lived in the land of Midian, and yet, listen to how Scripture describes him. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Exodus chapter 3 verse 1. A priest, yes, but not of a false god. Jethro was a priest of the true God, even before Moses received the law. And when Jethro visits Moses in the wilderness, after the exodus from Egypt, look at what happens. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord Yahweh, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods. Exodus chapter 18 verses 9 to 11. Hold on, he uses the name Yahweh. Not only does he recognize Yahweh, he worships him and even offers sacrifices. Then Jethro brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Jethro before God. Exodus chapter 18 verse 12. This is huge. Jethro, a non-Israelite priest, was already connected to Yahweh, and he wasn't rebuked or corrected. Instead, he was welcomed into fellowship with Israel's leaders. So what does this tell us? It tells us that God was already moving outside the borders of Israel. He was already known, already worshipped, already revealing himself to seekers in distant lands. It wasn't about ethnicity or nationality. It was about the heart that sought the truth. Jethro is a powerful reminder that Yahweh's reach was never limited to one nation. His story shows us that the worship of the one true God was spreading quietly, like light in the darkness. But believe it or not, there's even more evidence. Let's keep going. Now here's a mind-blowing thought. What if one of the oldest books in the Bible, possibly written before Moses, reveals deep truths about Yahweh, even though the main character isn't even an Israelite? Enter Job. Job wasn't from Israel. He lived in the land of Uz, a region far from Canaan. And yet the entire book is centered around his relationship with God. Let's look at how Job talks about him. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job chapter 1, verse 21. Yup, that's Yahweh again. The Hebrew behind Tut Lord is YHWH, the sacred name of God. And throughout the book, Job refers to God not just as a distant deity, but as a personal, righteous, and sovereign Lord. He longs to speak with him, plead his case, and even declares in faith, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Job chapter 19, verse 25. That's powerful. So what does this tell us? Job had a real, intimate knowledge of God, not as a tribal deity, not as one God among many, but as the living Redeemer. And here's the kicker. Job's friends, though flawed, also spoke of God. They wrestled with moral and spiritual questions just like the rest of us today, which means The knowledge of Yahweh, of a righteous, personal creator, wasn't isolated to Israel. It was known, debated, and worshipped by people from all over the ancient world. And that shouldn't surprise us. After all, God created all people, not just one nation. Romans chapter 1 verses 19 to 20 echoes this truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, for his invisible attributes have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. Romans chapter 1 verses 19 to 20. The fingerprints of Yahweh are everywhere. So whether we're looking at Job, Melchizedek, Jethro, or Abraham, we see the same thing. God was revealing himself, and people were responding. But now, let's bring it home and explore why this matters for you and me today. Now here's a figure who truly challenges our expectations, Balaam. He's one of the most puzzling characters in the Bible, a man outside of Israel with questionable motives. And yet somehow, he's able to hear directly from Yahweh. Let's take a closer look. And God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" Numbers chapter 22 verse 9. Did you catch that? God came to Balaam. Not in a dream or vague impression, but in direct conversation, just like he spoke to Abraham, Moses, and the prophets. Balaam responds in verse 13, "On to your own land, for the Lord Yahweh has refused to let me go with you." Numbers chapter 22 verse 13. Now pause right there. This is astonishing. Balaam, a non-Israelite living in the region of Pethor near the Euphrates, modern-day Syria or Mesopotamia, uses the covenant name of God, Yahweh. Not just a God, not just Oieleten or Elohim, but YHWH, the personal sacred name revealed to Moses at the burning bush. So here's the question. How did Balaam know Yahweh's voice? How did he learn to recognize it, so much so that he obeyed his command, at least initially? And why would Yahweh even choose to speak to someone outside of his covenant people? The answers are both mysterious and eye-opening. While Balaam ultimately proves to be greedy, prideful, and spiritually compromised, as later described in 2 Peter 2:15 and Revelation chapter 2 verse 14, his initial role still reveals something critical. God was revealing himself far beyond the borders of Israel. His name, his voice, his power were known even to Gentile prophets. It's important to understand, Balaam wasn't righteous, but he was spiritually aware, and God chose to speak to him. And even when Balaam is hired by King Balak to curse Israel, God turns his words into blessings. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? Numbers chapter 23 verse 8. Balaam ends up declaring some of the most beautiful prophecies about Israel's future, including a messianic vision. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers chapter verse. That's right, this flawed foreign prophet is used to proclaim a vision of Jesus, the coming king. It's messy, it's complicated, but it shows us something powerful. Yahweh's voice is not limited by location, lineage, or human plans. Even when people try to manipulate God for personal gain, his purposes still prevail. And Balaam's story reminds us that God has always had a global agenda. He was revealing himself long before Israel became a nation, and long after. The real question is, are we listening? So, after everything we've uncovered, let's ask the big question. Why does this matter? Why is it important to know that Yahweh was worshipped long before Israel, and that his name was known to people like Job, Melchizedek, Jethro, Balaam, and others? Here's why. Because it reminds us that God's heart has always been for the whole world, not just one tribe, not just one family, not just one nation. From the very beginning, Yahweh was making himself known to anyone who would seek him. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. Psalm chapter 113 verse 3. He was working through quiet hearts in forgotten lands, speaking to those outside of the spotlight, calling people to himself even before a covenant was ever written on stone. This means that God's story is bigger than we think, and you, yes, you, are part of that story. Maybe you've always thought God only worked through certain people. Maybe you've felt like an outsider, like you don't come from the right background, or don't know all the right traditions. But here's the truth: God sees you. He's been reaching for you long before you reached for him. Just like he spoke to Job, just like he walked with Enoch, just like he called Abraham out of a pagan land, he's calling you today. And the beauty of the gospel is this: everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Romans chapter 10 verse 13. That name is Yahweh, and in the New Testament, that name is revealed to us in his Son, Yeshua, Jesus, whose name means Yahweh saves. So what will you do with this mystery? Will you seek him, even if you're outside the usual boundaries? Will you listen for his voice, like so many did before Israel even existed? Will you respond to the God who has been reaching across centuries and cultures to find you? If this message stirred something in your heart, let us know in the comments below. What part surprised you the most? What questions do you still have? We'd love to hear your thoughts and journey with you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that God's love reaches farther than we ever imagined. Thanks for joining us today as we explored one of the most overlooked truths in the Bible, the mystery of the worship of Yahweh before Israel. And remember, Yahweh's story didn't begin with Israel, and it doesn't end with you. It continues through every heart that says yes to him. Until next time, stay curious, stay faithful, and stay rooted in the truth.